Let nobody turn us around, not now, not ever. Our next speaker, Mr. Kwami Abdul-Bey, a native Arkansan, a lifetime member of the NAACP Jacksonville branch, and serves as the chair of the NAACP Arkansas State Conference Political Action Committee. He is also a co-founder of the Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement and the founder of Investing in Black Future. He serves on numerous boards and commissions throughout the state, and he was a 2024 candidate for the Arkansas State Legislature. Please help me welcome Mr. Kwami Abdul-Bey.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Jacksonville Branch President Reginald Ford and his executive committee for inviting me here to address you. I also want to thank Pastor Eddie Miller for inviting the Jacksonville branch to hold this program here at New Commandment Church of God in Christ. I come here today in the place of Conference President Barry Jefferson, who is out of the state today speaking in Virginia. So as in my junior high and high school sporting career, I am essentially the second string, and I'm called to action on the rare occasion when the star quarterback is injured or unavailable. As Branch Second Vice President Nicole Ford stated in my introduction, I am Kwami Abdul-Bey, the Arkansas NAACP State Conference Political Action Chair. But what she did not tell you is that one of the many boards and commissions on which I gladly serve is the Board of Trustees for the Arkansas Historical Association, because I'm a history nerd and I specialize in Black history. In the next 15 minutes, I would like to share with you some of the interesting little-known facts about MLK that inspire me and why. I'm going to start off first by telling you that his real name is actually Michael Luther King Jr., not Martin Luther King Jr., and those who loved him affectionately called him Mike. Going back to the idea of sports, Mike was also a prolific basketball player, and he was known throughout the civil rights movement for his jump shot, even though he only stood at 5 feet 6 inches. I remember when I learned this factoid, and the very first thought that came to my mind was the Dave Chappelle Show skit with Prince playing Rick James for some waffles. I can't get that out of my head, and I think about creating a fantasy basketball team with both Prince and Dr. King on it. Crazy, isn't it? All right, Mike was considered the class clown of the civil rights movement. He was always cracking jokes, playing the Dirty Dozens with Andrew Young, Jesse Jackson, Ralph Abernathy, and everybody else. Matter of fact, they were in the middle of a joning section with each other at the Lorraine Motel when Mike stepped out on the balcony to smoke a cigarette minutes before he was shot and killed. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because I want you to know and to understand that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a regular man just like I am. He was an ordinary human being just like we all are. And when we see him as being no different than we all are, then we know and understand that we too have the ability to stand up with conviction and with faith and fight for our freedoms and our human dignities, just like he did. Instead of relegating ourselves to picking up trash, painting murals, and volunteering on this federal holiday, thinking, as we have been taught to think, that we are actually honoring him by doing those mundane things. Somebody has programmed us to believe that he was more than a man, that he was some superhuman, and that we are better off dreaming instead of fighting. They don't want us to be like Mike. Yesterday, on his last full day sitting in the Oval Office, President Joseph Biden paid tribute to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by doing something that Dr. King himself said needed to be done back in 1956. President Biden issued a full pardon, officially and finally exonerating Marcus Mosiah Garvey. In 1956, when Dr. King traveled to Jamaica to lay a wreath on the grave of Marcus Garvey, he said these words, quote, "Marcus Garvey was the first man of color in the history of the United States to lead and develop a mass movement. He was the first man on a mass scale and level to give the millions of Negroes in the United States a sense of manhood and a sense of somebodyness. Let us pledge ourselves to continue the struggle in the same spirit of somebodyness, in the conviction that God's children are significant, that God's black children are just as significant as God's white children. And we will not stop until we have freedom and human dignity in all of its dimensions." That's what he said at the grave of Marcus Garvey in 1956. Dr. King traveled to the continent of Africa several times. One time, after returning home, he went straight to Chicago and sat down with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He also secretly met with Malcolm X after Malcolm himself returned from his first visit to the continent. It is through these experiences that Dr. King came to officially call himself a Pan-Africanist. And he said that he was no longer a civil rights leader, but a peace-loving human rights champion who imagined a beloved community, a rainbow coalition where black people, Latinos, Native Americans, and poor white people can realize that they are all the same victims of racism and consumerism. He said that we are all the same economic slaves of capitalism and unchecked political greed. And that we all must come together in faith to fight against racism, poverty, and war. It was these words that Mike said and those connections that Mike was making around the world, particularly in Africa, where he met with dignitaries like President Kwami Nkrumah and called for the release of Nelson Mandela. That is what led FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to call Dr. King the most dangerous man of the future. What does that mean, the most dangerous man of the future? It means that J. Edgar Hoover understood that Dr. King was no different than you and I. It means that he saw how problematic Dr. King's influence could be on black generations to come. He understood how such an influence was not in line with the plans of a weaponized white priority system that is just fine with allowing us to come out of forced physical slavery, bondage, and oppression, just so we can turn around and voluntarily go into debt slavery, voluntarily go into algorithmic bondage, and voluntarily go into mental oppression. Hoover believed that if Dr. King were allowed to continue his work towards a beloved community, that you and I would actually want to be like Mike and get off of our couches and go to work to fully experience the freedom and human dignity that Dr. King talked about at Marcus Garvey's grave. This is why we must stop passively celebrating this day that Stevie Wonder and Bob Marley and Gil Scott-Heron worked with Coretta Scott King to bring into existence. We can no longer celebrate this day with passive remembrance, volunteering to do things that our hard-earned tax dollars have paid somebody to already do, and they didn't do. We must become the future that J. Edgar Hoover thought he had wiped out when they shot and killed Dr. King. We must now celebrate this day and all other 364 days of the year, living Dr. King's legacy through active, radical resistance to any and all power that wishes to subjugate us, our families, our neighborhoods, our communities, in the city of Jacksonville. Democracy is not a spectator sport where we can just sit back and watch what's going on. We must have the faith necessary to fight for our God-given right to a direct democracy that secures the right to live in a beloved, livable community where everyone from 8 months old to 80 years old has all the resources they need to thrive. Politics is the art and science of securing and controlling resources for your own purposes. So we cannot be in a beloved, livable community without getting involved in politics. Just days before he was shot, Dr. King encouraged the sanitation workers to all withdraw their money from the white-owned banks throughout Memphis and to put their money in the black-owned Tri-State Bank in Memphis. We, too, must go tomorrow and withdraw our money from U.S. Bank, Regions Bank, Wells Fargo Bank, and take it to the only black-owned banking institution in the state of Arkansas, the People's Trust Community Federal Credit Union. The Montgomery bus boycott, in Dr. King's view, was solely about refusing to spend money with people and institutions that cause you and your people harm, while intentionally supporting those that treat you and your people with human dignity. When we look at Target, which is headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we see a corporation that willingly pays its fair share of taxes. And it works with its state legislature to ensure that that tax money is used to pay for school breakfast and lunch meals throughout the state so that no child in Minnesota can go hungry. Target also does this while making sure that its employees have a livable wage and excellent benefits. Target is an example of a corporation that if Dr. King were alive today, he probably would support. On the other hand, let's look at Walmart. Walmart is headquartered in Bentonville, Arkansas. Here we see a corporation that works with our state legislature to make sure that it pays the lowest tax possible, and each session reduces that tax as much as they can without us raising up. It has the highest percentage of employees of any American company on welfare. Then Walmart turns around and helps our state legislature pass such bad public policy as the LEARNS Act, which allows our state government to treat our hard-earned tax dollars that is geared for public education like it's some monopoly money that they can give away to any private school with zero accountability. Guess what? There's not one private school in Jacksonville that even participates in the LEARNS Act. But yet, our hard-earned tax money does not go to Jacksonville, North Pulaski. It goes to private schools in Little Rock and in Fayetteville. Walmart is an example of people and institutions who smile in our face and then stab us in the back. Dr. King warned us to beware of support of such people and institutions because our freedom and human dignity requires us not to be permanent friends because we only have permanent interests. How can we find the faith to fight the fight that Dr. King has required of us, his future, so that we can bring into existence a beloved community, the one that he envisioned? How can we be like Mike? I can tell you. We need to stop playing games with this awesome responsibility that he has given us. We must stop concerning ourselves with things over which we absolutely have no control. We must focus on ourselves, our families, our friends, our neighborhoods, our communities, and our cities. We must join and financially support civic engagement organizations like the NAACP, like the ACLU, like the Poor People's Campaign, like Citizens First Congress, like Stand Up Arkansas, so that we can consolidate our individual power into a collective power that will no longer be ignored. This is the dangerous future that they thought they killed on that balcony in Memphis. Radical, active civic engagement requires all of us to regularly attend and speak at school board meetings, at city council meetings, at quorum court meetings, and keep tabs on what's going on in Little Rock at the state legislature. We must regularly email, call, visit our elected and appointed officials at all levels of government. We have to stay in their faces and in their ears. We have to hold people that we put in power accountable and answerable to us. We need to make them fear us now like they currently fear out-of-state special interests and in-state corporate greed. Anyone who tells you that they are against being woke is telling you that they support a world where the masses of people are asleep and dreaming. Those are the people that will have you believe, through the manipulation of your history books, that the only value that Dr. King gave this world and his future was his "I Have a Dream" speech. They want you to turn the other cheek. But Dr. Maya Angelou told us, believe people when they tell you who they are. We must join together in faith against these people and fight to take back the power that we have blindly given them and that they are using to re-enslave us. Thank you for listening today. I hope I properly understood the assignment. I'm going to close the discussion with one of my most favorite Martin Luther King quotes. Peace is not merely the absence of negative force, war, tensions, confusion, but is the presence of positive force, justice, goodwill, the power of the kingdom of God. If peace means accepting second-class citizenship, I don't want it. If peace means keeping our mouth shut amid injustice and evil, I don't want it. If peace means becoming complacently adjusted to the deadening status quo, I don't want peace. If peace means a willingness to be exploited economically, dominated politically, and humiliated morally, I don't want peace.